Wonderful. We should be live here. So thank you everyone for joining this session. I know you had some options, so we're glad to have you here, and we're not going to disappoint. So my name is Jonathan Covey. I'm a senior analyst at Talent Tech Labs, and have the pleasure of moderating this discussion on assessments. Really, the purpose here is to talk about practical ways that staffing executives can use assessments to drive business results and just be more effective in the market. We have a number of very smart folks on the panel here, and they're representative of both some of the leading tech providers in the space, as well as the client side. So I'll go through the names here. We have Satish Kumar, the CEO of Glider.ai. Glider.ai is, we consider, a skill assessment specifically focused on assessing technical and coding talent. We have Dan Synes, co-founder of Tradeify. Tradeify is a behavioral assessment and was actually recently acquired by Paradox, one of the leading conversational bot providers. So interesting dynamic we can hopefully talk about there. We have Omer Malad, the co-founder and CEO of Vervo. It's bright and early for him in Australia, so we hope he has coffee in hand. Vervo is a skill assessment and a lot of capabilities around customizing assessments for different use cases. And then it's great to have Pat Rush, the senior director at Kforce, large staffing company that I'm sure you've heard of. So before we jump into assessments, let's go around and hear from each of the panelists a bit on their background, and let's start with Satish.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Satish Kumar, co-founder and CEO of Glider.ai. We have been providing talent quality evaluation and fraud prevention solution to enterprise, MSP, and staffing firms. Right? We are on a mission to make hiring fair and opportunity accessible. We have been working with large set of staffing firms to bring quality at the forefront of the contingent market. In fact, more than 60% of the world top IT staffing firms believe in Glider to vet candidates with confidence and stand out from the crowd, right? So we fundamentally believe in competency over credential. That means anybody who's capable should get an opportunity. That is what we are after, right? And contingent leaders and research organizations agree with us as well. No wonder last year we won SIA coveted Shark Tank Award for the most innovative solution in the market, right? So, in summary, we have built a solution for talent quality that empowers and protect the enterprise and the staffing agencies. So, I would love to discuss more about the assessment and evaluation solution today.
Thank you. Dan Synes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Synes. I was the co-founder at Tradeify. Tradeify was acquired last fall by Paradox, a leading provider of conversational AI, and really a company that's kind of creating the future of hiring. I'm now a VP of product there at Paradox, and really excited about what we're doing with the original Tradeify platform, and now combining that with the conversational AI technology. What Tradeify developed was an image-based assessment process really designed for high-volume hiring in particular, where we were able to deliver a personality assessment in 90 seconds. So a much faster, more fun and engaging way to measure personality in candidates that really worked well for that high-volume sector. Now we're able to kind of apply that within the chat as part of a more engaging continued candidate experience. My background is in design, and so I'm very focused on that candidate side of the equation and how we can design better experiences for the people that are going through the hiring process.
Thank you. Omer, good morning.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So at Vervo, our mission is to make hiring about merit. We focus on putting candidates in the scenarios they would normally face on the job. So we're trying to get as close as possible to simulating the role, and we test job-specific skills and general work skills. And then we automatically grade the responses and rank candidates based on how well they perform. And we learn from each customer, so we continue to get better and better over time using our machine learning models. And we work with both corporates and agencies and staffing firms. Thanks.
Excellent. And last but not least, Pat.
Hey, everybody. I'm Pat Rush. I'm a Senior Director of Delivery Transformation with Kforce. I've been in technical recruiting for 10 years. I've held recruiting roles, recruiting leadership roles. And now my focus for the firm is all around recruiting strategy and innovation. Part of my scope within Kforce is around assessments, how we utilize assessments, within our recruiting front and within our clients. Looking forward to being here and having this conversation today.
Thanks. All right, cool. Let's jump in. So assessments and really screening in general, it's a broad category. There's a ton of tools out there. And just within assessments, you have behavioral, skill, gamified, all these different tools. And one of the things we spoke about last week is that how you use these tools is much different on the contingent side in a staffing environment than corporate full-time workers. And so that's another layer of complexity. I want to start with why even use assessments at all in agencies? Where in the funnel should it be used? Who really owns the quality of the worker? And so let's start with that question, which is, why should staffing companies even consider use of assessments? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
Sure, I can take that. So awesome question, right? So the goal of assessment in the funnel is to maximize the ROI for the staffing agencies, right? Now, the staffing firms can use assessment for their just internal purpose to vet the candidate and identify the pool of qualified candidate to present to the client, or they can actually take a step further and actually present the report with the client as well. Now, whichever way you decide to use, whether just for internal or to present to the client, the place in the funnel where you should use assessment is only after you engage with the candidate, you have talked to the candidate, set the right expectation about the process, and only then send the invitation for the assessment. What I've seen that it fails me miserably, that hey, somebody applied and hey, take an assessment, right? So that kind of connect has to be there for you to expect candidate to commit time to you, and it also shows that you value the candidate and are equally vested in bringing the opportunity to the candidate. So that's where you will place in your hiring funnel.
Thanks. Omer, any thoughts to share here on why even use assessments in staffing?
Yeah, I think that in addition to all the obvious reasons, the difference in the use case with staffing firms is you're presenting someone to a client, and so so speed is important, and obviously the way that you present someone is important, particularly if it's contingent. You're trying to win, so you want to get your candidates placed over someone else's candidates, and you want to do that quickly and in a way that is convincing. And so an assessment, and particularly the output from that assessment, gives you a format to present the candidate versus a resume or something more static like that. And that's a key difference between the staffing firm use case and a corporate, where you're making your own decision as opposed to presenting that information to someone else to make a decision. I think that's an interesting, and Pat's the best person to talk about that, obviously.
Yeah, and we'll jump to him in a second. Dan, any thoughts to share, sticking on the provider side here?
No, I mean, I think I generally agree that we use these assessments to give you a more bias-free view of information on that candidate. So it's an objective measure across all the candidates you're looking at, which can make that a lot easier to present to a client in a unified way. So I think that's a key portion of why you use assessments. I do think where they fit in the funnel, I maybe have a different perspective from Satish, because I think it depends on what assessment that is. So, in our case, like when we're looking at personality and we have a very fast, engaging kind of assessment format that's quick, we want to do it higher in the funnel if possible. So you can kind of expand the reach of that and maybe reapply that candidate to a different role. But I completely agree in the premise with Satish that you don't want to put someone through something before there's a commitment level of some sort. You want to be really respectful of that candidate's time, especially in the current environment we have of candidate shortage that's out there. So you have to really think through what's the journey that candidate's going through with this role and where is it going to best fit? And do you need that information at this time, or could you get that information at a later time?
Yeah, that's a good point. All different types of use cases here, and what you're measuring is different. So at what point in the funnel is that appropriate to capture? So Pat, tell us about some of your goals as an organization and using assessments and what that looks like at Kforce.
Yeah, I think all the presenters are spot on here, and I agree with them in different aspects. I think the way we look at it is, there's different variables at play or different use cases for types of scenarios. And I can give a couple different examples. It may be where the client is engaged and they want to use some type of assessment as a part of their evaluation process of a candidate. They may help determine at what phase in the process that they want to implement the assessment. It could be, before they actually see the resume of the candidate, because they want to see the resume along with the assessment. The assessment helps back up the skills the candidate has listed on their resume and can help facilitate the rest of the interview process. Sometimes we have clients that want to use an assessment as, a second round interview, like in lieu of an on-site, different things like that. So having the flexibility of these assessments, we can kind of work with the client in what they require for their interview process. And the goal is to present the best candidates for the right opportunity while improving the speed and the interview cycle for the client. So it's, benefit for the candidates and the clients to that front. A lot of staffing firms like us, we also have practice-based work where we're building actual project-based teams that we use assessments for as we're building out these project teams. So that's another variable that could be different at what point we're using different types of assessments as we're building the project team. We could use them top of funnel to gain interest in the project, doing initial screening of candidates that just are not the right technical fit or whatever it might be for that project-based work. I also think, this use case is often overlooked by a lot of teams or just recruiters in general, but the use case for interview preparation for candidates and prepping for these technical interviews, it doesn't necessarily always have to be about screening in or screening out candidates. Oftentimes, if folks haven't interviewed for a new job in a long time, or, we do a lot of technical recruiting. So we're using a lot of the coding exercise, algorithmic based questions. Like candidates and engineers aren't necessarily writing algorithms every single day on the job. And they need to practice for that if they're going to be challenged on that in their interviews. So it's just a, good opportunity for candidates to also, kind of just prepare for these interviews that they're going through. And that's something that, we help our candidates with as well. So I think different variables you can look at in different places that you can plug these assessments in, but it's good to have like the flexibility that a lot of these tools offer for us as a staffing firm to be able to do that.
Great. And I think you hit on an interesting point there, which is that assessments can be a tool to develop candidates, and it's being used certainly on the corporate side in talent management, and there are mobility implications around that. I want to go a little deeper into like the candidate side. And Satish, I'll go to you, because when we spoke as a group, we were talking about this perception by candidates that, oh, this is another thing I have to do in the recruitment process, another barrier to entry, if you will. Like, I just want to get the opportunity. But you had an interesting point, which is this is a way to prove your skills and really move faster through the recruitment process. So in this candidate constrained environment, how do you position an assessment to be really a benefit to the candidate?
Sure. So definitely assessments have benefits to the candidates. I mean, an automated assessment or a screening that is well calibrated presents an unbiased data about the candidate competency, right, to the hiring manager to take objective decision. And that ultimately helps candidate as well. It helps them showcasing their strength. It gets them jump ahead in the hiring process in some cases, because that is how the client has designed their own hiring process. But more importantly, once they get tested, staffing firms can actually present multiple opportunity to them as well, as against getting interviewed by every client, right? Um, but I think another point that Pat also pointed out, which is very relevant here, that through the assessment process, hiring companies can actually find the upskilling opportunities by identifying the weak areas through the assessment, and they still go ahead and hire the candidate, right? And this is especially relevant for the hot market. And if you are really after veterans or people from economically poor background, it makes so much sense to identify the strength areas and hire based on that, given that there is upskilling opportunity coming down the line. So, and one other point I want to make sure that through the assessment, right, the capability part is evaluated. Now, as a candidate, I can spend quality time in the live interview with human to find the fitment with the group, fitment with the culture, right? Those are the things that are proven to have higher job satisfaction. It's a win-win situation for the candidate as well, that the things that can be automated for capability evaluation, let's get it done through the assessment, and let me spend time with the hiring manager figuring out whether I am right fit for this organization, for this group, for your culture, or not. So there are so many benefits to the candidate, and really about the messaging from the staffing firms, right? They said earlier that um, that it has to be presented as their benefit, but on top, if you have a higher quality benchmark and you share that upfront with the candidate, it makes the position look more aspirational as well. The good people get attracted to the better quality jobs, right? So I think these are some of the points that can be used by the staffing firms to communicate and message assessment.
Thanks. Omer, any thoughts on positioning assessments to candidates, best practices you're seeing?
I mean, I think in short, it's an opportunity to succeed, right? Not an opportunity to fail. That's the key. So, I mean, even the word assessment's not a great word, right? It sounds like root canal. I mean, so what it is it's an opportunity to showcase your talent, okay, and be judged based on what you can do and your ability to do the job. Now, that sounds like something I want to do. Assessment might sound less like something I want to do as a candidate, right? So the key is, it's not about examining you, it's about giving you an opportunity to show us what you can do, and also get a realistic job preview and see what the role is like, and opt in. That's the key.
Great. And Dan, interested in what you have to say here, because there's a little bit of a different flavor with Tradeify. You're kind of exposing to folks their personality, like a psychological profile, and in some sense helping promote self-awareness, and that can be a good tool for candidates. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I first agree with both the guys' previous comments here on this, but in addition, I think that the real benefit to the candidate is giving them feedback. Often you just don't get any feedback when you're going through the hiring process. And so, Jonathan, you mentioned the use of assessments and talent management for learning. You can learn as a candidate. And I think that's a really great opportunity to let them learn more about themselves, learn more about how to interview properly, just get general feedback that can help them advance in this job or the next thing they apply for, so that they feel like the experience was worth it when they left. And that continues to create a good relationship between you and that person if there's a future role where there might be a fit for them.
Great. Pat, I'll pose a different question to you. And, one of the things folks listening to this discussion are thinking about is like, there's so many assessments out there, particularly in the skill space, because they're so occupational specific. You got ones for programming, like the gliders of the world, retail and different industries, hourly versus shift workers. At Kforce, how did you guys navigate picking the right assessments for different segments? How can folks tackle that challenge?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of different tools and potential solutions out there. I think at the fundamental level, you have to look at what is the true problem that you're trying to solve. What are your use cases that you then need to potentially attach a tool to or find a solution for? And that's the approach that we took. What are our clients looking for? What are they asking for? What are our candidates looking for? What do they need to be successful? And that's at the start when we were evaluating the different assessment tools that we use. That's kind of the approach that we took when we were meeting with folks like Satish and Omer with their tools. And I think you can either look for a very narrow solution to a problem, or there are tools that are more broad that can solve more broad problems or use cases that you may have in front of you. And one tool may not be the best solution. You may need to use multiple tools. And that's something, as a firm that we do. We have a few different types of assessment tools for different use cases that were best fit for us. I think another important thing to look at as well when you're evaluating different tools and vendors, once you kind of figure out what this problem is and how you think you need to solve it with whatever tool you're going down, I think it's important to also look at the company itself. Like, what is their journey? What is their product roadmap? Are they going down the product maturity that you need to see for your staffing business? Are they going to be able to evolve with you as the market, as dynamics, as things are changing within the talent landscape? And we all know things change so quickly. So that's something when we were evaluating tools to look at as well. Where are they at in their product maturity, and where are they planning to go? And does this fit with where we see the market going as well? So, a lot of different things to look at. But I think, again, the key is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What are the use cases for those problems? And then go to the vendor partners and these tools and figure out which one is the best fit for what you're trying to solve.
Cool. Yeah. And Satish, one of the things you called out was like, there's no silver bullet. There's a need for different tools for different use cases. You might use a Paradox for screening on the front end, and then Glider for a different use case. Any thoughts to share with the participants on just how to navigate what is an overwhelming ecosystem of solutions?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at the hiring funnel, the purpose of evaluation could be different at different point, right? At the top of the funnel, in a way, you want to engage with the candidate, but also want to little bit pre-screen. Are they really the fit to take them further? So the top of the funnel screen bots are a good way to really engage with the candidate at a scale and get them pre-filtered, right, for your role. Then if you go a little bit down, it could be assessment product, right, where you are trying to understand much deeper by simulating the kind of job in a more interactive and an engaging way to get much deeper insight. And the third stage could be even a human conducting the live interview through the interview tools, where they are using tool for them to do the hands-on task, but they're present with the candidate as well. So if you look at it, depending on the client, some of them use all three in the process, or if, for example, it's for non-tech functional roles, maybe the screen board is good enough, right? Because they can really figure out the right traits to assess the candidates. But typically for the technology roles, they do want to go deeper in understanding. So they can skip the screen board, but really want to get into a deeper evaluation through assessment or even through the live interview. So depending on the role, depending on the seniority as well, because if for senior candidates, they would rather want to spend human time using the work in the tool and assessing the candidate. So different dynamics play a role depending on the industry, depending on the type of evaluation, and depending on the seniority level of the candidate. You can pick one or more methodologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's this other layer, which is that companies want to assess for the way that they do work. There's a cultural element, and then of course they're hiring for different personas, like you called out, and so it's like, how do you balance the assessment's ability to customize versus what's out of the box in a sort of library of job families and roles? And maybe Omer, I'll jump to you, because Vervo is one of those systems where you can sort of create your own as well as use out of the box job roles. Any thoughts on the balance of customization versus what you can get out of the box from a solution?
So first, I just want to come back to Pat made a comment about understand the problem you're solving. That may sound obvious, but I think we all know that's not always the case. I think that's really important, okay? And if you have clarity about what you're trying to solve, you're more likely to actually get the solution that you need. And Jonathan, to your point, so we will always lean to the side of tailored and in context. And so, if you talk about resilience, a sales development rep gets told no a lot, they need resilience. But a 911 emergency operator also needs resilience. But it's clearly in a different work environment. So it doesn't make sense to test resilience generically. You want to test resilience in the context of the role. Same with attention to detail, librarian versus CFO. So we would say make the assessment appropriate for the role, test people in context, get as close as possible to the role itself. What does that role look like in the company that is hiring, and what does success look like? So a graphic designer is not the same job in every company, despite having the same title. Therefore, the assessment should be the same. That's our view.
Thanks. Great. Let's shift gears. It's fun to talk about technology and all the stuff that's out there, but business results are really important. So on ROI, maybe Pat, I'll jump to you. Like, how do you know that the assessment program and strategy is working?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question and a good question. And it's an area that I spend a lot of time in, just as we're, looking at improving our overall recruiting strategy and evolving our recruiting strategy. And I mean, data is king. And luckily with a lot of these more modern assessment tools, we get a lot of data from them, which is great. Not only the success of the assessments, how candidates are scoring compared against your candidates versus, all the candidates that take these assessments. And then you can use your own data for it. So things that we look like are overall conversion metrics. We want to see an improvement in our candidate funnel from top of the funnel through the end, the offer stage. So we look at things like the speed or conversion metrics from like an actual candidate submittal to an interview, from an interview to an offer, time to interview, time to an offer, different things like that. Like, are we improving the speed at which we can deliver quality candidates to our customers? We also measure engagement rate at the assessment level. What is the dropout rate of when we send a candidate an assessment? What % of candidates actually complete that assessment or complete it within, a given time period, which is also an important metric to measure. Because if you're losing candidates in that process, and then maybe there's tweaks you need to make to the assessment to make it more, consumable for the candidate. If it's taking too much time for candidates to complete, they're less likely, to take the time to complete it, different things like that. We look at our client satisfaction scores as well when we do different NPS, both on the client and candidate front, improvement there. And then ideally at the end of the day, we're looking at revenue and, higher pay rates for candidates and higher bill rates as well. So there are, multitude of different things that you can measure, but I can tell you from the maturity we've gotten to with a number of our assessment tools, we have seen significant improvements, especially with the submittal to interview, submittal to offer, or submittal to hire, and then just the time that it takes to get candidates through the actual process is improving drastically as well.
Got it. Okay. So a lot of metrics you're looking at there. And just a quick follow-up. So it sounds like you're doing a look back and looking at client NPS scores. Are you also capturing how well the candidate is doing in the role, like performance? And then does that help inform what good looks like and how you go about using the assessment?
Yeah, exactly. We look at all of that data when we correlate it back to assessment. We obviously don't use an assessment for every single role and every single position, but based off how we have different items integrated into our systems, we know if there was an assessment applied to a certain job or a certain candidate and things like that. So we can kind of measure it through, through the entire project lifecycle that the candidate was on assignment with our client and the NPS scores and the scores that we get based off of that.
Okay. Dan, thoughts on ROI, things to measure?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pat covered most of the most important ones in there. I think, for us, completion rate's a big thing that we look at. We want to make sure that we're maintaining that. We have a 95% completion rate across around 17 million assessments now. So it's something I'm always looking at and staying focused on. I think time to fill is often something that's looked at as well as a key metric. And then just this could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different groups. So quality of hire. So that could be turnover reduction, performance increase, retention. There's a lot of different ways that could be looked at, but it's probably the most meaningful ROI impact you can generate. And the more that we can take assessment data and pair that with other data that you have and create a feedback loop of that, the smarter and smarter we can get with that information in the future to improve that ROI.
Great. And Omer, you're doing some interesting things at Vervo, collecting a bunch of data sets. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so we're closing the loop, which sort of from our perspective is the most important thing, in addition to what both Pat and Dan said. All those metrics are important, but we're now surveying the hiring manager 120 days after the decision was made, and we're asking a number of questions. And really the goal is to understand, was that hire successful? Are they performing in the role? And then what we're then trying to do is understand or correlate the post-hire performance to the performance in the assessment, and then look at which skills mattered the most. And so the goal eventually is to get to a point where we can say, okay, these are out of all the sales reps that you hired, these are the ones who ramped quickest and got to quota quickest. Well, how did they perform in the assessment? Well, they were really good at these skills, and so that means that these skills correlate to performance. So let's over-index on that and test more for that. And not in a generic sense, but in a role-specific sense and sometimes company-specific sense. And so it helps inform the assessment, make the assessment better. It's a never-ending feedback loop. And so that's really part of our philosophy is, we don't know what good looks like. We know how to test for it. The client knows what good looks like, the organization hiring people. And so we want to help learn. We want to learn from them and use that to inform the way that we're evaluating candidates.
Yeah, super important. Like that closing the loop is super important. And traditional providers like an Aon or Willis Tower Watson, it's traditionally been pretty consulting heavy. But Now with APIs and integrations, you can start to connect systems and run these sort of algorithms to understand what good looks like, to your point. Satish, what are you guys doing on that front? How do you think about that?
Oh, definitely. So on top of what you just talked about, right, one of the things that we also track is candidate experience, and that is collected through the candidate satisfaction survey at the end of the test. That also gives us understanding how candidates are taking as well. But going back to this, connecting the feedback is very, very important, because I know, and I think Omar said it correctly, that that the what is good is really defined by the client in a way, and we all know that the calibrations are different for different clients, right? What might be good for client one will not stand true for client two. So really, ability to capture the data downstream, and we do conduct the survey post hire as well, and feed the data back to recalibrate the test for that position. As to the closing back this loop is very important. So overall, one of the point that Pat mentioned, that he tracks submission to interview, interview to offer, and submit to hire as well. Among all these, for us, the North Star is um, interview to offer. Why is that, and not interview to hire? Because candidate can back out for various reasons beyond the control of assessment, right? What we want to measure very, very closely is that, does hiring decision is in line with the outcome of the assessment, which is interview to offer. Was he good enough looking at the competency report, and after that conducting interview, willing to offer the candidate? So that part we track very, very closely, and then recalibrate if there is change in that, right? And some of our customers have been able to achieve that interview to offer ratio in the range of 80%, which is significant for customers.
Great, great. And so, in line with this conversation around data and closing the feedback loop, kind of raises an important topic around integrations in general. Pat, what do integrations look like at Kforce with these assessments in terms of where data is showing up? Are recruiters living within a native assessment like Glider, or are they bouncing to the ATS? And what are some of the organizational roles of where people are living, and any best practices to share there?
Yeah, for us, it's a combination of both. We have integrations with some of our tools and not with others. But I think in an ideal state, you want some sort of integration from the assessment to your ATS or whatever your database is where you house your candidate information. Because we talked about getting that full picture of the data. That's the easiest way to do that. You can use the assessment data along with your data that way, and it's much easier to track. With the integration into ATS, is we can also do things like search for candidate test scores and things like that. So candidates who have historically taken an assessment, maybe we don't necessarily need to have them take one again when they're coming off assignment, but if we can resurface that easily within the ATS, keep the recruiter in their home base that they're working out of, most of their day, that's the most ideal scenario. But I do think there are needs to also be within the assessment tool for different types of use cases, obviously, like to send out assessments and things like that, compare assessments to the broader data that the assessment tool gives you. But ideally, if you can, and what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck and be able to measure ROI, the best is having some type of integration back into whatever system, whether it's an ATS or CRM or something like that, where you house that information is the most ideal, and we've seen the most benefit from that.
Got it. Okay. Dan, thoughts on integrations? And I'd love you to highlight specifically the Tradeify Paradox relationship, and are Tradeify assessments being deployed via a conversational bot today? What's to come on that?
Yeah, I mean, our relationship with Paradox started with an integration. So I think, that's how most of these things begin. I think just to answer the broad question first, though, I think it needs to be wherever someone's going to use it. And often that's in the platform that they're in every day, not in a separate space. So you have to think about like, where will they actually get to this information so that it can be helpful for them. In the case of what we have now with Paradox, it is able to be delivered and deployed through Olivia, through the chat experience, and integrated through our backend experience as well. So you can quickly see and sort the candidates by fit and pull up their personality info, pull up interview questions, all within that kind of integrated experience. We have an API as well, and that was kind of our basis for Tradeify's business. And so we integrate with ATS platforms. We can integrate with CRMs. We want to be wherever that data needs to be for you. That's where it's most useful as an assessment.
Thank you. Omer, thoughts on integrations and user experience where people are living?
Yeah, I might take the dissenting view. So I've got mixed feelings about integration. So everyone says they want integrations, they want everything in one place, and believe me, I get it. I think when you're providing a rich output like we are, there's an element of dilution. So we'll never be able to provide the exact same level of insight and experience inside someone else's platform. And so what happens is you're going to get a portion. So we might be able to send the score or even the score by skill group, but you won't get all our reporting and all the insight. So what ends up happening is I think there's a combination of time that you spend inside usually the ATS or the system, the sort of workflow system, which is convenient. But then when you want to go deeper, you end up coming back. Our clients end up coming back and spending time in Vervo at some stage. And so, whenever we sort of work through integrations, there are limitations in terms of the other side, the platform we're integrating with, how much can their API actually capture? I think that's an important point. So you want to remember that you're not necessarily getting everything that you bought when you're using an assessment tool through the ATS. It's important to understand that and then figure out what are you going to do in your workflow tool and when do you actually go back for the deeper insight or deeper functionality of the assessment tool.
Thanks. So we're getting towards the end here. One of the things that came up when we chatted last week that Pat, you said we got to cover this. It was around fraud in assessments and validity. Satish, maybe I'll start with you because Glider's doing some pretty cool stuff around biometric tracking, and talk to us about the ethicality of some of these technologies like AI, biometric tracking, and how staffing companies should think about compliance when it comes to this stuff.
Definitely. So just to be clear, you said two things. You said fraud, then you added validity as well. So to be clear, the fraud part is in the context of candidate behavior, and validity is in the context of assessment by the provider. So let me tackle the fraudulent behavior of candidate part first, right? So I'm sure that most of us in the audience who have been catering to the contingent market would have heard one or two stories around candidate unfair practices in the hiring process, right? And the remote work has made the situation even worse during the pandemic area, because if by somehow I can get through the vetting process, right, the entire work can be done remotely, even by somebody else, with much less risk of getting caught. So we track all this behavior, right? In fact, we have an internal document which we call candidates behaving badly, and where we have documented various things that gets caught in the system, right? Some of the stories are like candidates are lip syncing in the live interview and attributing the disconnect to the bad internet connection blatantly. Somebody else is taking test on somebody else's behalf, or they're taking help over the phone conversation or through text, WhatsApp, or in a way, somebody else is completing the test through the remote desktop sharing, right? Somebody else is doing the test, somebody else showing up for the interview. All kind of things happen. In fact, now I'm hearing that people are taking multiple jobs. They're working remote. Nobody knows which job they're working on. So one such bad apple can ruin the image of the staffing firm, right, in the eye of a client to the degree that they can lose the account. So they are serious stuff, right? Now let me share some of the real data in our platform. From 2020 to 2021, there is 92% increase, almost double, in the fraudulent activity in the remote interview, and sorry, in the remote assessment, right? And here's the funny part: this jump was despite the fact that there is AI proctoring enabled, and candidates are pretty much aware that they're being monitored by the webcam, by the click stream, by the audio, right? Despite that much increase, we have a 50 checkpoint in the automated proctoring system that ensures the genuineness of the candidate attempt, right? So um, it's a weird world, I will say. Remote world sometimes it shows the human behavior will not being watched as well. Uh, but this is the reality right now we live in, and it is very important part. The way I put it, that it's not only your ability to assess the competency, but also to verify if the assessment was taken in a genuine manner. Because unless there is second component, your outcome might not be as reliable.
Thanks, Satish. Pat, anything to share there around compliance?
I agree with everything that Satish said. I think if anybody listening uses assessments, they've probably run into similar situations. It has become more of a problem since the big push to remote work. I do think that there is a scale of when we talk about fraudulent behavior with candidates. Some of the things that Satish just mentioned was, some of them were the worst end of that, where someone else is taking an interview, they're completely using outside resources to kind of try and game the system. You will see with some of these technical assessments where, candidates will use outside resources like a Google, like a GitHub, things like that to try and solve problems, copy and paste a solution into the IDE. That may not necessarily mean that this is a bad candidate or a fraudulent candidate, but maybe the assessment's too difficult for them. Maybe they're not at the level that that client's looking for, and we need to position them into a better opportunity and have that open conversation. And for us, it really comes down to the relationship that the recruiter has with the candidate, and that's at the core of all of getting a candidate ready to take any of these assessments. It still comes down to the recruiter's ability to build that relationship and put the candidate in the best position to be successful. So again, there's a varying range of fraudulent behavior. Some of it's worse than others, but some of these tools like your Glider AI, the world's really help staffing firms like Kforce, combat some of those issues that we see.
Thanks. And Dan, on your side, is fraudulence a relevant thing really for Tradeify and a paradox screening? I would think less so.
Yeah, it's not really as much of a thing. I mean, you can never say there's none. But I think the validity portion of your question is a bigger piece for us, and making sure that when you're looking at an assessment to use, it needs to be validated for the purpose you're using it for. And that's a big issue in the behavioral assessment world. A lot of assessments are not validated for the purpose of selection, but yet used in selection, and that can create a lot of bad situations, EEOC compliance issues for you, and a bad experience for the candidate. So really doing your homework, read the manual that the company provides. They should have something like that gives you more depth on the validity and background of the tool.
Thanks. Omer, anything on fraud and or validity?
So obviously all this stuff happens, and I agree. But when we talk about these things, it always makes me think about when we started doing banking and financial transactions on the internet. When eBay launched and online banking started, and there were people who said, "Hang on, there's no way I'm going to put my credit card on the internet because someone could steal it. It could end up somewhere." And there's obviously an element of fraud. But there's been financial fraud since the beginning of time, with or without the internet. I think it's the same thing here. So overall, we're much better off being able to buy things on the internet, even though there's like a tiny percentage of fraud, and eventually it gets insured, and most of the time it's okay. I think, candidates have been lying on their resume since the beginning of time. They've been lying in interviews since the beginning of time. So now they're going to, a tiny, tiny minority, like Satish said, a bad apple, are going to game, the next frontier, the technology. And I think with remote working, when you're hiring people you haven't met all over the world, that's amplified a little bit. So it's obviously an issue, but I also think, like, by and large, we're far, far better off, and we've just got to make sure we're being sensible. The other thing is, to Pat's point, we've got to distinguish between genuine fraud, where, someone's actually, paying their cousin to take the assessment instead of them. Okay, so that's identity fraud. That's fraud. Okay, that's just lying. Versus, so I went to law school and all the exams were open book. It's not cheating. It's an open book exam. And I think if someone can Google something and get to the answer, well, maybe they're more crafty than, maybe that's a good thing. In startups, people use Google all the time to figure stuff out. Question is, what are you trying to test? Is it something that maybe the question was too easy if you can Google the answer in 2 seconds? So the assessment needs to be better and get people to actually do work and figure things out. So I think we've got to distinguish between genuine fraud, which and there are measures to detect that and prevent that. We've all got them. Versus what are we actually trying to test, and what do we expect people to know in advance or figure out during the assessment?
Jonathan, can you make a comment on that?
Sure. Yeah.
So I agree with what Umar said, except one point, that if we can do both, in the sense that provide the audit trail of what actually transpired. Do not take the decision on the candidate behalf or on the client behalf. You have the complete audit trail of what transpired. There are companies who really promote, hey, go do whatever, search, copy, paste, and that's the least part of the problem, actually, right? And but solve the problem. So the providing that confidence and clarity and transparency on the assessment report, that this is what has happened. See if it makes sense for you to let it go or go after that.
Thanks. Great. So we probably have only time to go around one more time on what I think is an important topic here, which is the major pitfalls here to avoid when adopting an assessment, mistakes that you've seen made on the tech provider side in working with clients, and Pat, maybe lessons learned at Kforce. So let's talk about that. Who wants to jump in first, and then we can go around and wrap things up.
Happy to start. I think we touched on this earlier. I think it's setting people up for success. You don't want an assessment that's not appropriate for the role or the level of role or the context. You don't want something that's too long or too frustrating, or questions, 50 video questions in a row with 2-minute time limits, all that kind of stuff. You don't want something that feels like it's torture. You want something that feels like this gives me an opportunity to show what I can do and to succeed. Or in Dan's case, it's with personality. It's not a right or wrong, good or bad. It's more about profiling and insight. So you want something that's appropriate and that feels like it's helping you succeed, not as a candidate, not helping you fail. And I think that's a really good foundation to start with.
I can take a swing at this next. I think I mentioned this in our prep, but these assessments at the end of the day, they're not a silver bullet. They're not going to make the hiring decision on behalf of, the client or whoever might be involved in the hiring decision. Really what they are is they're a piece of the overall evaluation process. I've seen so many times we're working with a new client that's gone through a series of bad interviews with candidates, and they completely overcorrect. They make an assessment, they make it too hard, they think it's going to solve all their problems, and then it ends up doing the opposite. It makes it even worse than they were before. So I think just understanding, you use it as a piece of the overall evaluation process, the overall experience of the candidate. And from the staffing standpoint, at the end of the day, it still comes down to the recruiter's ability to build the relationship with the candidate, understand where the candidate's strengths are, what their motivators are, and put them in the best position to succeed and find the right role that's the best fit for them, using an assessment to help validate, verify their skills, and put the candidate's best foot forward. That's what we've seen being the most successful.
Yeah, excellent point. I mean, you can't just throw technology in there. The people aspect of this is incredibly important. Dan, anything on this last topic? Major pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe from a broad perspective is picking a company that's like set in stone and not moving forward with their assessment process. I think Pat mentioned this earlier, just they're looking for companies to work with who are evolving and growing and changing. The workforce is changing really rapidly and we have to keep up with that. And as assessment providers, it's a key part of what we do. But a lot of the kind of old set ways of assessments don't work like that. They're kind of set and forget. But everyone who's on this call is really, I think, pushing for how can we continue to evolve and get better each time. So avoid that pitfall, I think.
Yeah, both are good. The people aspect, like what Pat mentioned, and then the tech things to make the process more efficient, get more data, make it more scalable. Omer.
I think I answered that. I think Satish has left Jonathan.
Oh, apologies.
No, I was going to comment on that. So yeah, I mean, definitely when we're looking for the pitfalls, right? Are you going to buy yet another tool from a vendor, or are you buying a business solution from a partner who's going to stay with you, right? So that understanding is very important. But more importantly, from operational level inside the organization, getting all the stakeholders on your side is important, because while top executives might have the right intent and they feel good about the system solution, especially for the staffing agency, unless the recruiters who are going to actually use it day in and out, unless they have bought in the solution, they will consider it as another one more step and a hurdle in their placement process. So getting them on board is very important before you roll out the solution for a staffing agency.
Excellent. Let's park it there. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank all of the panelists for joining and adding these insights. Folks that are listening, you know where to find these companies, and you could reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want a connection and explore some of these use cases further. But yeah, thanks so much, and hope everyone has a great rest of the conference this week.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.